Good morning and welcome, everyone. My name is Laura Schrake. I am with the Council of the Great Lakes Region, and it is wonderful to have you joining us for today's webinar. This morning's webinar is in partnership with the U.S. Business Council for Sustainable Development. And I will be joined by Claude Griffin from the U.S. Business Council and Matthew Rusk, our featured speaker from GRI North America. And we will spend the next hour exploring how organizations can better understand and better communicate their sustainability and climate impact. Transparently communicating climate impact is an important issue for organizations across the globe. And because roughly a third of the Fortune 500 companies and 10% of the Fortune Global 500 are headquartered in the Great Lakes region, it's an important topic we wanted to highlight on our regional webinar platform. The Council of the Great Lakes region is focused on solving for sustainability, and we are working across borders and across sectors to convene on critical sustainability conversations that will help drive solutions to region-wide challenges. And when talking about the Great Lakes region, we're referring to the economic region, which includes 8 U.S. states from Minnesota to New York, and the 2 Canadian provinces of Ontario and Quebec, as well as many First Nations. The Great Lakes are at the heart of the region, holding 20% of the world's surface freshwater and 84% of North America's. And they play an important role in the well-being of the region's millions of residents, providing drinking water for over 40 million. The Great Lakes region is also North America's economic engine. It holds major industries that provide tens of millions of jobs, employing roughly a third of the American and Canadian workforce. And with an economic output of approximately $6 trillion US, if the economic region was a country, it would be the 3rd largest national economy in the world. So with its natural resources and economic strength, the Great Lakes region is positioned to lead in the transition to a low carbon economy and sustainable future. And to help support the transition and facilitate collaboration is the Great Lakes Carbon Collaborative. And to share more on the collaborative, as well as introduce our guest speaker, I'd like to hand it over to Claude Griffin. Claude is the Executive Director of the U.S. Business Council for Sustainable Development and will serve as the moderator for the rest of today's webinar. I'll come back in at the very end. But I want to, I guess, make a note before I do hand it over to Claude. He will be facilitating the Q&A after our guest speaker. And so to help with that, we ask if people could, they have questions, to please type them into the Q&A box instead of the chat box. That will just help us keep track of those a little bit easier. So thank you in advance for that. And Claude, I'll hand it over to you now.
Great. Thanks, Laura. And hello, everyone. Glad you're able to join us today on this very informative webinar. I'd like to give a brief overview of the U.S. Business Council for Sustainable Development, as well as the Great Lakes Carbon Collaborative, and introduce our presenter for today's webinar. The U.S. Business Council for Sustainable Development is a 501c6 nonprofit business association that was founded in 1992 to give leading U.S. businesses a platform to work together to design, implement, and scale sustainability solutions. Today, the Business Council's cross-sector platforms, projects, and partnerships bring leading companies together to solve circular economy, carbon, energy, water, and equity challenges across North America. The Business Council is also a global network partner of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. The Great Lakes Carbon Collaborative is one of several sustainability platforms. We're pleased to have partnered with the Council of the Great Lakes region, with Mark Fisher, Laura Schrake, and this great team on this cross-industry platform consisting of industry, academia, nonprofits, and solution providers that's designed to mobilize businesses in reducing carbon emissions in the region while enhancing economic vitality. Working groups have been formed around various technologies like carbon capture utilization and storage, hydrogen, nature-based solutions, and electrification. If you're not a member of the Great Lakes Carbon Collaborative, we encourage you to reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to discuss opportunities to engage and identify the steps to become a member. The topic of today's webinar, Understanding and Communicating Your Organization's Sustainability and Climate Impact, is a result of an area of high interest that has been expressed by participants in the Carbon Collaborative. We're pleased to have Matthew Rusk with us today. Matthew is the head of GRI North America, based in New York City, and GRI is the independent international nonprofit standard setter that creates the global common language for impact reporting to foster transparency, organizational accountability, and informed decisions to advance sustainable development in the interest of all. The GRI standards are the world's most widely used standards for sustainability reporting that are used by 78% of the world's largest companies and over 11,000 organizations. During this 1-hour webinar today, you can expect to hear about GRI's approach to developing standards and how the reporting standards are helping companies communicate transparency. We encourage you to submit your questions and looking forward to a very informative session with Matthew. And with that, I will turn it over to Matt. So Matt, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me today. Really glad to be here, and thanks for that kind introduction. If you're hearing me okay and seeing my screen, I'll proceed with a bit of a presentation to kick things off here, and then excited to open it up for questions after that. And provide a great intro, so I'll skip over some of the early aspects of the presentation, but really great to be here with you all today. What we'll go through is share a little bit about GRI, GRI's role in that in the evolving global reporting landscape. We often end up talking about the corporate reporting landscape, but the GRI has a lens even broader than that, as our standards are applicable to organizations beyond just corporates. But we'll talk a little bit about corporate disclosure landscape today. Some updates that involve our climate change and energy standard revisions, and then some GRI resources that may be helpful to the audience today. If you're not familiar with GRI, it's teed up nicely, but we are an international independent standard setter that was founded out of Boston 27 years ago. As a nonprofit, we offer the GRI standards as a free public good, which provide a global common language for organizations to communicate their environmental, social, and economic impacts. The standards help organizations to be transparent and accountable for their impacts on the world. The resulting standardized disclosure provide relevant insights for companies and their internal and external stakeholders to really help and aid decision-making and improve environmental, social, and financial outcomes. GRI's strategic priorities are creating and maintaining world-class sustainability disclosure standards, driving the adoption of global standards for reporting, helping organizations continue to improve the quality of their reporting, and support the public access to organization sustainability disclosures. Here's a snapshot of our history since being created in response to the Exxon Valdez oil spill and being founded in Boston. We were born out of the need for transparency and answering the question of how business and investors can improve corporate behavior. GRI established the first sustainability reporting guidance in 2000 and evolved to becoming a standard setter in 2016 that has a bit more rigor and governance around what we put forward. And since 2016, we've remained committed to reviewing, updating, and adding to those standards to remain current and fit for purpose. Our global headquarters is now in Europe, with global leadership split between Amsterdam and Brussels, and actually even a little bit more decentralized as we evolve here. We even have some of our one of our chiefs in the U.S. now in Princeton, New Jersey. But to ensure we have global relevance, we also really value having a presence throughout the globe. So we have 8 regional hubs across the map that you can see here in orange, including GRI North America. We also have additional local presence, as indicated in teal, that are either country desks or partnerships with key allies. Here you can see highlights of our global recent usage, which has grown with elevated stakeholder interest in corporate transparency, as well as new policies. I'd say corporate transparency there, but it is driving the usage of other types of entities as well. New data actually shows over 14,000 organizations are using the standards. 3/4 of the largest company in the world publish sustainability reports using our standards. So that's the credible way that they've chosen to communicate their climate and sustainability impacts and how they're managing them. About 260 policies around the world in 85 different countries reference or require the GRI standards. And this includes the GRI standards being incorporated into the EU's new sustainability reporting standards that were created for disclosure requirements of the new EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the CSRD, which will require about 50,000 organizations to report on double materiality, which we'll cover a little bit later. The directive will have global impacts due to non-EU headquartered organizations also getting pulled into this reporting requirement due to subsidiaries and direct presence in the EU, as well as their role in value chains. So this will have global ramifications. We continue to see increased interest in our standards, with downloads of our standards continually to rise annually. And we also saw significant growth in our GRI certified sustainable practitioners globally, and have over 500 organizations in our community and certified training partners. We have over 100 to really foster more expertise of how to credibly communicate and disclose your sustainability impacts and work to manage those impacts. As far as our North America reach and usage, here are some highlights. The majority of the Russell 1000 use our standards, as well as over 60% of the Fortune 500 and the S&P 500. You see a large usage in the U.S. Business Roundtable. 73% of organizations led by members of that council use the standards. High correlation to those identified as the Just 100, with 92 of them GRI reporters. And we're also experiencing a rapid increase in the number of GRI certified sustainable practitioners in North America, which I'm proud about, and have roughly 80 organizations in North America. And we have growing number of certified partners that produce software and tools to really help organizations embed the sustainability data collection and management process and disclosure process throughout organizations, really embedding it into the business and making it outside of just a small siloed sustainability department. Now I'll take some time to quickly introduce you to the GRI standards themselves. As far as our approach, we work with a global network of thousands of professionals and organizations across geographies, stakeholder groups, and sustainability themes to ensure our GRI standards represent the global best practices in sustainability performance and result in reports that provide comparability. We have defined constituency groups that we work with to develop new reporting guidance, as illustrated here, defined. This approach ensures the participation and expertise of diverse stakeholders in the development of all the GRI standards so that they may serve a broad set of stakeholders and the public interest. The GRI standards are developed and issued by the Global Sustainability Standards Board, the GSSB for short, and they are GRI's independent standard setting body. Our GSSB consists of diverse members representing every region across the globe, as well as each of the 5 constituency groups here, which include investors, business, labor, civil society, and mediating institutions covering academia, some consultancy firms, and some other organizations that don't cleanly fit in some of the other categories. All the GRI standards are developed through a transparent and inclusive process, which is overseen by the GSSB. Each standard is developed by expert working groups, which includes representatives from each constituency group and various geographic locations, similar to our GSSB. The standards are also grounded by authoritative information already available and take into account international instruments that underpin the expectation of responsible business conduct and transparency for certain sectors or topics. Each standard goes through a peer review and public comment period. And that's a process we actually just went through with our climate and energy standard that ended at the end of February. So why use the standards? The GRI standards really help create and maintain a global common language for sustainability impact reporting, which is a huge aid to communicating your work in sustainability or how it relates to your entity. A common language and set of metrics for disclosures allows for greater comparability and quality of information across the globe, which enables stakeholders to make decisions in their interest based on data and facts rather than perceptions. So this is quite critical. We need to identify the good performers and the laggards. And if we have that consistency, we can really help to understand how organizations are performing and really collectively get a better sense of how to understand or communicate sustainability impacts. With a GRI reporting process guiding and instructing reporters on how and what to report, internal and external stakeholders get a comprehensive picture of the organization's impact and management of impacts on social, environmental, and economic matters. For reporting organizations itself, our standards support risk management and operational improvements. We see many reporters speak to how using the GRI standards is an excellent management tool. This was really called out in a practical guide we produced with SASB at the time, now under IFRS, but how using the GRI standards and the SASB standards together are complementary. And that report consisted of extensive interviews with 4 reporting organizations, but then also a survey of over 100 other reporters. And this came out loud and clear that GRI standards can help as a management tool, issue identifier where an organization should focus on because of the impacts it has on the world and on areas that are important to their stakeholders that help them succeed in making sure they manage those relationships well. And with the standards being applicable to organizations of any type, size, and region, this is really critical for bringing along the supply chain. Many of us have probably seen some news out of the SEC yesterday. Scope 3 was not included in that rule, but a lot of the comments already are citing that this is critical for the supply chain as the vast majority of organizations, their bigger emissions are in their supply chain. So we need to find that way to speak and disclose in a specific way throughout the value chain applicable to organizations of all size to really get a sense of impacts and ability to manage those impacts. The GRI standards are a modular set of interconnected standards. They allow organizations to publicly report the impacts of their activities in a structured way that is transparent to stakeholders and other interested parties. The standards have requirements, recommendations, and guidance to help use the standards. Our modular system of standards formally include 3 series. The universal standards, which are applicable to all organizations, and instruct how to use the standards, include contextual disclosures for the organization, and run the organization through the materiality assessment and disclosure process. The universal standards are used in conjunction with other series to provide information on how the organization manages its impacts. The topic standards span economic, environmental, and social topics. There are currently 33 topics, and we'll highlight those momentarily. The newest series is our sector standards, which pools together likely material topics for specific industries to aid in the materiality assessment process and elevate the comparability and consistency in disclosures throughout the sector. We currently have 4 standards finalized, 4 currently in development, and roughly 30 to come. This module structure enables iterative updates to topic and sector standards that are made available to improve disclosure quality and comparability. And this is the case with that climate standard I've already referenced that just went through public comment, as well as we just released a biodiversity standard. So updating as we go to make sure we provide the best standards out there. When you use the GRI standards, you can use them in 2 formal ways. You can report in accordance with the GRI standards, which has 9 requirements. Organizations can also report with reference to the GRI standard, which has 3 requirements. So between those 2, the 3 common requirements are to publish a GRI content index to cite where these standards are used and where interested stakeholders can find that information. Provide a statement of use for the standard. So are you reporting in accordance or with reference to? And notify GRI of the usage of the standards, which are a free public good, but this helps us track their global usage and make sure it's reaching all stakeholders in a helpful way. In accordance report requires application of specific reporting principles, usage of the 3 universal standards, disclosure of impacts on organizations' material topics, and provide reasons for omission of disclosures that aren't reported and required related to the universal standards, topic standards, or sector standards when a sector standard is appropriate. These requirements for in accordance report really help produce comprehensive reports, more optimized for helping stakeholders to make informed decisions, whereas reference report more or less help leverage a global language and commonality of metrics, but don't meet all 9 requirements. So that being said, we do have some nice comprehensive reference reports. They just fail to meet all 9 requirements. So organizations cite that as a reference report versus in accordance. Here are the 31 topic standards currently. You can certainly see that the breadth of them does touch environmental, social, and economic topics. So as other jurisdictions or standard setters or frameworks are focusing on specific areas, you can know that we cover a wide breadth. Sector standards were introduced as a part of our standard revision in 2021 with the objective of increasing quality and completeness and consistency of reporting and responding more comprehensively to stakeholder expectations. Standardized reporting on specific sectors really increase transparency and accountability for that industry as a whole, and hopefully elevate the performance on social, environmental, and economic impacts. The sector standards describe the context for the sector, describe the topics that are likely material for an organization in that sector based on the sector's most significant impacts. And it also lists disclosure identified as relevant for reporting on those topics by the sector. The disclosures consist of items in existing topic standards, so they point to those 31 that were previously shown, and also add additional disclosures if there's a gap identified, something that's not covered in the current topic standard. So an example being of that for agriculture, aquaculture, and fishing, there was a soil health disclosure and an animal welfare disclosure added because of the sector specificity and that being an area of impact for that sector. Here you can see the 40 standards that are intended to be created and where they are in the process, where we've completed the 3 pilot projects and have now just recently released mining. There are 4 groups of the sector standards, so basic materials and needs, industrial, transport, infrastructure and tourism, and other services and light manufacturing. So we have oil and gas, coal, agriculture, aquaculture, and fishing, and then mining that are fully published at this time. So as far as GRI's role in the landscape, we're all, I'm sure, feeling inundated with a lot of news, both of new happenings in disclosure mechanisms, but also in different jurisdictions. As we see it, there is a global, and I'll talk very specifically here about corporate disclosure. There's a global reporting system for corporates that has 2 perspectives or 2 pillars. And the one is an organization speaking to their impact on the world. You can think of this as an inside-out lens or perspective or pillar. It speaks to an organization's impact on the economy, environment, society. And as you can guess, that's where GRI sits. And then you have a strengthened financial reporting perspective, and this is bringing in sustainability or ESG related topics that speak to financial materiality, how those topics affect or those implications on those issues on the enterprise value. So you can think about this as an outside-in lens. You can see some different frameworks and standards that cover this area, and this really works to serve investors in capital markets, and this is where the SEC considerations has been. And whereas the other side you can think of as impact materiality. Now there is a through line here, and there's not a bright wall between the two. In fact, you may have noticed with the constituency groups that the GRI work brings into the creation of our standards, investors are one of those constituencies. So we do look to address the interest of stakeholders, but with that eye on the impact out on the world. But where the interest comes into play for corporates and investors is looking and understanding those impacts and how it may affect key constituency groups, key stakeholders. That is clearly going to have a through line to what will, in the short term, medium, or long term, become financially material and relevant to the success of the business. Double materiality, of course, is made up of these two perspectives and is formalized on the global landscape thanks to the European Sustainability Reporting Standards and the directive requiring that double materiality reporting. And we also see TNFD here sitting a bit between the two pillars. They frame themselves as a bit materiality agnostic, citing having a framework that helps to identify and better disclose risk and opportunities, as well as impacts an entity has in relation to nature. Because part of our mission is really creating a global standards and common language so that we can not report for reporting's sake, but report to a better performance. We really have been prioritizing partnerships to foster the strengthened global corporate reporting system that accounts for the different perspectives of materiality, even if we don't cover both per se, because we want this global system to work together and unnecessary report burden to dissipate, so more action and resources to enable those actions take place. So several key partnerships. We have the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and part of our technical committee for our climate and energy standard would touch more upon that. TNFD was a key collaborator with us on our biodiversity standard, and we were pleased to be a knowledge partner for them in the developing of their framework guidance and assessment tools. The IFRS, we are really pleased to continue to collaborate with. We're aligning our standard setting activities and our terminology and definitions, whether you're reporting scope 1 through 3 from a financial materiality lens or because of an impact lens, it's essentially, it's the same data. So we want to make sure that those alignments really foster not double reporting and alleviate report burden. And a critical partnership has been our work with EFRAG on the European Sustainability Reporting Standards to satisfy requirements of the CSRD. To dive a bit more into that collaboration, because it will in fact have global ramifications, I wanted to touch a little bit on our collaboration with EFRAG. And you can see we formally began working with them in 2021. EFRAG is that standard setting body that produced the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. And since then, we've had several key actions, announcements, and further commitment to work together. As a result of our co-constructor role with EFRAG on those new European standards, GRI came out with a joint statement in September that acknowledged the high level of interoperability achieved between the respective standards in relation to impact reporting. The statement communicated the shared belief that reporting entities' material impacts on the world are in general the starting point for identifying its related risks and opportunities, which are also required under the ESRS financial materiality perspective. So again, how those two perspectives complement one another and are innately connected. Importantly, there are also the acknowledgement that the existing GRI reporters will be well prepared to report under the ESRS, given the many shared disclosures and alignment. I'll pause here for a minute too to say some of the responses to the SEC was this is a positive step in some ways to get more disclosures that is useful to investors, but a lot of corporates or those that will need to report need to still keep an eye on EFRAG and what's taking place with California because of the inclusion of scope 3 or of now requirements that look to go well beyond what the SEC will mandate specifically on climate. 3 key resources that have been launched to help show the alignment and interoperability of GRI and ESRS is we have a PDF that we jointly produced that shows interoperability between the ESRS and GRI disclosures, an Excel table that shows ESRS and GRI standard data point and maps those together that we produced. We also recently launched a GRI Academy course that illustrates how GRI reporting can help prepare and satisfy aspects of ESRS. And we see a lot of organizations who aren't already voluntary reporting see a nice pathway to get up to speed or prepared for ESRS prior to them being directly mandated because of this nice overlap between the GRI standards and the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. Following the successful partnerships of 2021, a new collaboration agreement between GRI and EFRAG was signed. The agreement acknowledged the benefit of alignment achieved between the standards to date and commits the organizations to continue working together. Areas of collaboration in that agreement is the development and guidance, more development guidance of standards, including existing and new sector standards, so then potentially leading into our sector standards, standards for SMEs in the EU, and standards for non-EU companies for which the CSRD will apply. I mentioned our sector standards because the new and existing, we have some existing, they are interested in producing some new ones. And maybe they work well with our developmental timeline and will enable great collaboration on that front going forward. Organizations will also, our organizations will also partner to produce education and training for ESRS preparers and users. And there will also be joint work to advance digital tagging with XBRL taxonomy. So digital tagging to enable machine and human readability of these reports. With the recent release of the Climate and Energy Standard and recognition that this is a critical area of disclosure generally, but also for this audience, I'll highlight aspects of the proposed revision to the climate and energy related disclosures and the exposure draft of the proposed revisions. As you can imagine, from the founding of GRI, disclosures on climate and energy have been incorporated into our disclosures, and they have been some of the most widely used GRI standards. The GSSB identified the review of the climate change related disclosures as a priority, given changes in the disclosure landscape, evolving best practices, and need for climate related reporting to extend beyond reporting exclusively on emissions and energy consumption. Today, stakeholders are in need of more in-depth and detailed information about the mitigation and adaptation strategies of organizations. The scope of this project included the update and review of GRI 305, our emission standard, 302, our energy standard, and disclosures on financial implications and other risks and opportunities due to climate change in GRI Standard 201. So all of these were published in 2016 and deemed an update would be helpful. The objective of the project is to incorporate new subjects not covered by the existing GRI standards, such as transition plans and just transition. I'll now touch upon the update approach and jump into the high-level overview of the revision. As with all our standards, the GRI climate change and energy exposure drafts were developed through a transparent and inclusive process based on the public interest that adheres to GRI's due process protocol. The content of the exposure draft was developed by a multi-stakeholder technical committee made up of leading experts and practitioners. That committee represents the 5 constituency groups previously highlighted and assorted geographies. As you can see, the group ranges from socially focused NGOs and environmental NGOs to Microsoft, to investors and label organizations, to academia and the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and the German Environmental Agency. Experts from global and regional regulatory standard setters were also involved with the aim to ensure interoperability. Once again, keen focus on creating a global system rather than disparate different things in different jurisdictions or to account for different perspectives of materiality. There have also been a number of key climate change related initiatives and instruments that have been used as inputs to the revision of the climate change related standards. This diagram is just to give you a sense of the landscape we operated within for the development of the climate exposure draft. In terms of alignment with other standards and frameworks, efforts were made to ensure alignment to a high extent and interoperability with other global standards like IFRS, the ISSB S2, and regulatory standards like EFRAG's ESRS E1, and methodologies in the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, once again with them as a key partner in our technical committee. An additional resource that we put out for the public comment period was publishing a visual at the beginning of December to serve as an informational tool on the GRI draft content, providing a high-level response to the demand for comparison and alignment of GRI with others in the climate disclosure landscape. It compares the climate change draft main elements with what is included in other standards, frameworks, and jurisdictional proposals, like that of the SEC, now a rule, but at the time it was a proposal. The document displays whether certain areas of climate-related disclosures are covered or not. The table also shows that the GRI draft has some unique elements that are not covered by other standards currently and often not accounted for. This is the case for the just transition and social impacts on local communities and vulnerable groups associated with the use of carbon credits and greenhouse gas removals. As far as some key and unique features of the revision, we just quickly touched upon two there, but the GRI exposure draft includes those social impacts related to climate change. This resulted from the technical committee being adamant that the principles of just transition have a dedicated disclosure in the draft to cover impacts on people. While many acknowledge the impact climate has on people and communities, it is not currently stressed enough in a climate reporting landscape. So we really wanted to correct for that. The revision also includes disclosures relevant to climate and biodiversity nexus. We've heard so much more and learned so much in the last couple of years on this and so this new draft really complements the new GRI biodiversity standard that was published around a month ago. The draft represents the fundamental importance to reduce emissions as a primary mitigation action. And this is particularly crucial because global emissions continue to go up and we are not on track to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Carbon credit use is also drawn out in the new disclosure. The greenhouse gas is a technical committee. With that being the case, the revision aims to really align content to the methodology of the greenhouse gas protocol, and they're undergoing revisions of the protocol. So full alignment with the greenhouse gas protocol to date, with an eye on some of the revisions that they're actively working to make. GRI Energy Standard Draft is an instrument to help organizations be transparent in their accelerated decarbonization, but also to report on impacts that may arise from energy consumption choices. High level here is an overview of the revision. There's 6 new disclosures, 2 management disclosures, one on transition plan, one on adaptation plan, a topic disclosure dedicated to just transition metrics, a topic disclosure on greenhouse gas emission reduction targets that incorporate elements of inventory methods and greenhouse gas emission reduction on the existing GRI 305. So if you've reported to GRI, you'll recognize 305 as our emission standard. Topic disclosures on greenhouse gas removals and carbon credits are also added to this draft with the objective to increase transparency regarding the use of removals and credits within an organization's climate mitigation strategy. Beyond the new additions, the other disclosures have been examined to incorporate the latest best practices and foster alignment when possible. This slide shows the structure of the energy exposure draft, which was built to enable organizations to disclose publicly their most significant impacts related to energy and how they manage these impacts. The revised structure includes a new management disclosure on energy-related policies and commitments. The other disclosure are revisions of the existing disclosure, which extended requirements and updated guidance to help report. As far as some resources that could be helpful to this group, we've currently produced some great new ones. We have particular tools that address interoperability with ESRS that were previously cited. We also have a resource that shows if you're reporting your emissions through GRI, how it relates to the new IFRS standards S2. So you can find that on our website. For the climate draft specifically, we have that document that you can get in touch with me to get access to that. It can be a little bit hard to find that one. We also have webinars that were conducted throughout the public comment period. Same thing, if interested in that, feel free to get in touch. So a training course is coming to the Academy in 2025, and we are embarking on collaborations for pilot exercises that are planned next year. So if there's an interest in being an early adopter to this new standard, please be in touch because we're exploring these pilot opportunities. The GRI Academy continues to roll out new courses, one on biodiversity that just came out, but some on assurance of information in a sustainability report, which is becoming an ever-present theme, and some now that really cover the landscape and not just those courses that help with the certification on the GRI standards. We have our community and GRI services and those licensed partners tools that I briefly talked about before that can help bring along your colleagues in your organization to be a part of the disclosure and impact communication process. And with that, I thank you for your attention for the presentation and look forward to continuing with a conversation with Claude and have some Q&A. Thanks.
Well, Matthew, that was great. We really appreciate the comprehensive coverage of GRI and quite a few nuggets that you shared there. And several questions have been submitted as the presentation was being made. And we also have a few questions that were given to us by those who registered and submitted at that time as well. Where I think I'd like to start is with questions that have been asked during the presentation itself, and then we'll pull in some of the ones that were submitted during the registration. The first question we'd like to pose is this: what is the business case for a company that only operates in the US or North America that isn't subject to regulations like the EU CSRD to report to the GRI standard? And this is in the context of yesterday's release of the SEC climate disclosure rule and so forth. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I know sometimes it seems like some of these conversations can be heavily European focused, but that is ending up being the case because of the global ramifications. So that, like mentioned, 50,000 organizations will be pulled directly into that directive. It doesn't take much to qualify as having enough presence in the EU to be pulled into that. It's 250 employees, 40 million in revenue, and 20 million in assets there. Now that to be required to do to report to that, even if you do not fall in those categories, and that's 2 of 3 will bring you into that directive. If you do not fall in those categories, some of your key business partners may. So they will be asking for this information throughout their supply chain. The other aspect of it is where, even before we get to elevated interest of other stakeholders, is if you're dealing with investors and they're getting this level of transparency elsewhere, they are going to have that appetite to get similar disclosures from organizations from other regions. So that's where you'll hear the investor audience say, you know, we get all this insight on both perspectives from some of these other entities that are fully based in EU or have a presence enough that they will disclose this. Now they're going to be interested in that information from other entities, even if they're not required by that mandate to do so. We also hear often that the GRI standards are helpful as an issue identifier in that management tool, but also really just get you in the right direction of travel for these different jurisdictional mandates that are popping up. So the mandates are behind the market, right? We have 14,000 organizations already reporting to the GRI standards because they internally see the business value, or they're getting those questions from different stakeholders. Many organizations are now having a lot of disclosure burden, a lot of requests from different business partners or stakeholders, and leveraging global standards allow you to hopefully collect that data, have an ongoing process to do that, and then address these questions as they come in. And you can lean on these universal way of communicating about your sustainability impacts and work. So that's where we really see kind of the business case to unify around some global standards, also get prepared for potential requirements that are coming either from different jurisdictions, from investors, or other critical stakeholder groups that are kind of pseudo requirements that will lead to more transparency being needed from each and every organization.
Great, thanks, Matthew. As many organizations assess the various tools and methodologies out there with regard to communicating their impacts, as you've already pointed out in your presentation, there are other methodologies as well. And one of the next questions is this: how is GRI connected to ESG?
Great question. It's fascinating when we get to the conversation about communicating, because I had a great conversation with a longtime researcher and consultant on sustainability communication, and it was and she used to do some research on the usage of sustainability reports from different stakeholder groups. And she's backed off some of the research there, but she sees the sustainability reports, and I agree with this, as a grounding tool to credibly have the information and an information hub to then go out to different audiences and make it accessible to different audiences, certain aspects of communicating that sustainability story. I bring that up now a bit with ESG, because ESG was brought about to somewhat simplify the categorization of sustainability related issues, mainly for an investor audience to understand: governance, environment, and social, non-financial related information. And some will take issue with the non-financial because they have financial relevance, but it's a different type of data than is it being accustomed to being reported. So ESG does not have the best universal definition around it. So some will use ESG purely with that financial materiality lens that we had talked about. Some use it more broadly, and this is why you have either intentional or unintentional greenwashing, where someone says, how is this company focused on renewables or electric vehicles dropped from this indice that was understood by many as being good, tracking organizations good for the planet? How were they dropped in fossil fuel organizations or energy companies that are producing a lot of emissions still in that indice? Well, that indice was focused on disclosure and actually risk to the business, not impact on the world. So because it's used in so many different ways, we talk about sustainability reporting. Some would call that ESG reporting, but we have to be careful with how ESG is defined. So they're absolutely in the same orbit, but we're better off by defining it more specifically. And when ESG has become a contentious issue, it's because it kind of sits in this area that not all understand it. But we break it down into the different topics, and they're not nearly as polarizing as that term now, ESG. You know, think about, does it matter to care for your employees or not pollute your immediate environment, or treat your customers well by producing good products or responsible services? I mean, these aren't polarizing things. These are things we can all get on board with. How we approach that is, of course, decisions of the organization and the stakeholders in which they work.
Great. And as you point that out, organizations have many audiences they want to communicate their impacts to. And I believe you also mentioned, the various ways that GRI can assist organizations with respect to specific areas. And the next question is this: and GRI is relevant beyond corporate organizations. Can the standards be applied to municipal governments, as an example? Do any local governments currently use GRI for reporting or developing climate action plans?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and one I feel like we need to find more space to talk about. So much in different jurisdictions is focused on corporates that's where a lot of the conversation goes. But I'm really pleased to say that the GRI standards are applicable to municipalities, academia. A good amount of colleges can use them. I know of small municipalities. I also know that someone came up to me at an event last year in Toronto and letting me know that Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver leverage the GRI standards for some of their sustainability reporting. So that's we end up getting trapped in talking about corporates, but it's really pertinent to make sure that all organizations are thinking about their economic, environmental, and social impacts. And I'm really proud that the GRI standards are well suited for that as well. I'm actually on our sustainability reporting team for GRI to produce our own sustainability report to make sure we, in fact, walk the walk as best we can.
Okay, great. This is not a question that was submitted, but it came to mind as you were just sharing and also during the presentation itself with respect to other entities using GRI. You mentioned the Academy course. How might you connect the Academy course or identify ways uh, individuals, other organizations can participate in the Academy course that would help better prepare them to apply GRI?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're really pleased as a nonprofit to ensure we have some freely available resources to all, and that the standards themselves are free public good. So anyone can use it without any cost. We do realize that many are interested in growing their expertise on usage of the standards or upskilling in their role. We need a lot of disciplines to get this right because it needs to be embedded throughout organizations. Accountants are needed to help assure it. Legal departments can be pertinent. Environmental health and safety folks clearly are key to being involved with it covering the expansive topic areas mentioned. Of course, we did a lot of different disciplines. So really pleased that we came out with a GRI Academy in 2020, on-demand asynchronous courses. There is a fee involved, but we've tried to make that really approachable to a lot of different audiences. And in the cases with some organizations, having partnerships with an accounting association or academia to also make the fee. It's already approachable, but maybe some partnerships that make it particularly approachable for their group. So it's a great place to start. So definitely check out the Academy itself and feel free to be in touch if you're interested in pursuing it as an individual or part of a group. And we can make sure it remains accessible. The GRI standards as that free public good too. GRI 1 as part of the universal standards. It also is a good starting point to say it explains there's no disclosure involved GRI 1. It explains how to use the standards. So that's also a great starting point in conjunction with the Academy.
Great. Let's make a transition in terms of thought here. Obviously, organizations are very interested in and keen to ensure that their information is credible. And when it comes particularly to credits. So the next question is along that line. How does GRI address the trading of ZEV credits and carbon credits?
Yeah, thank you for that. And that is certainly an area of particular interest. And this is why it was included in aspects of the revision to the climate and energy standard. And why we work with a lot of organizations in those technical committees and go through the peer review process and public comment period we just did. So it's bringing that disclosure into the fold. If you or business partners have a net zero commitment, how are you achieving that? Where do offsets or credits play in that? We need more transparency and disclosure on that. Now, the methodologies and best way to calculate that continue to evolve. So in our refresh, we point to some guidance and some methodologies that can be used, that can be chosen by the organization, and then by usage of the GRI standards, you explain the methodology you chose and the way to account for that. This also allows for the evolutions of like the greenhouse gas protocol to take place kind of simultaneously with our GRI standard refresh. So if you go to the energy or emission standards, you can see how it's articulated and it'll guide you through that process of how to report to that, what methodologies to look for. One thing that's consistent in all of our standards, we do point out critical tools and protocols or guidance that'll help you report. Everything cited in our standards are freely available. So if you go to our standards, we're not going to put you, direct you to something that's going to be costly and prohibitive to organizations of all sizes, types, and geographic locations to use, but rather some free and accessible resources. So that'll be a great place to kind of check out what could be technically some of those next best steps for that.
Let's talk a little bit about strategy and communications strategy. This is a question that was submitted prior to the webinar today. Is there a different strategy communicating to, quote, climate crisis deniers than to believers?
Of course, this is a fascinating topic and disheartening to some of us, right? I'm sure doing some of this work, but we have to meet people where they are. And this is where those terms of ESG, if you don't know enough, that's gonna sound, someone tells you it's a boogeyman, you're inclined to believe them. So, but when we break it down into topics that matter, I mean, the thing about climate change is, I had a wonderful event a few years ago, and they said, well, if we solve for emissions, actually we solve for a lot of respiratory issues, and the human impact is vastly um, helpful even before we get to the just transition and some other ramifications of climate change. So I would say, you really have to break it down into issues that matter to folks and find the right language where you find common ground. Everyone loves thinking about the human impact on jobs. And if we're moving away from some industries, how's that going to affect some jobs? If we're moving into certain industries, how is that going to affect jobs? So even if someone wants to debate the science of climate change or the climate crisis, we can break it down into economic opportunities of other stakeholders. Investors are asking for this, right or wrong, in maybe somebody's mind, they're asking for this. So it's going to be business critical to get on board. So I think you just work to find ways to find those commonalities. I know someone walked into a new organization and someone right off the bat said, just so you know, I hate what you do. And she was in the sustainability department, and then taken aback, rude awakening. But then she kind of went through the sustainability reporting process and broke it down into those topics. And she was really pleased to see that her cubicle mate was reading the report the day it came out, and actually was, seemed quite pleased with what they were doing from the environmental front and more the social front. So it's meeting people where they are.
Great. I think we have time for maybe one more question. I'm going to pull this one from what has been submitted here today. What would you suggest as a first step towards GRI reporting for a small to medium-sized manufacturing organization?
Yes, great question. We want to make sure these are applicable and usable to organizations any size. I would say definitely kind of, if you go to download the GRI standards, there's no doubt you're going to get an intimidated page count. But what's in there is a lot of guidance and a lot of explanation of how this can or should work. So I would recommend check out some of the resources we have on our website. Check out GRI 1 that explains how to use the standard. And then you may realize that we want to tackle emissions and equity and opportunity and water and waste. And maybe you want to approach it by going after a few of those areas and produce a reference report as a way to upskill and get your process in order, and then go through a materiality assessment, really see all the different areas that you want to be able to better understand as your organization, to understand those impacts, to manage those impacts, to then better communicate how you are managing those impacts. So I think that's a good way to start. And of course, you can reach out to our North America Regional Hub, GRI North America, to get in contact directly about some resources that we can offer you.
Well, Matthew, this has been great, very informative today. Really looking forward to some follow-up conversations with you and engaging further on the topic. Thanks again for your time today. And now I'd like to turn it back over to Laura.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just popping back in at the end. Matt, thanks so much for your presentation, and Claude for your moderation. That was really really interesting conversation to listen to. So thank you so much. And I know Maria, Matt's colleague, was on the back end answering some questions in the Q&A box for us. So thank you to Maria as well. I just want to sort of, I guess, emphasize what something that Claude had mentioned earlier around the Great Lakes Carbon Collaborative. If anybody is interested in understanding more about that program and how they can get involved, please reach out to me or to Claude. We'd be happy to speak to you. And I also want to invite everyone to register to attend an upcoming in-person event. The Great Lakes Sustainable Growth Forum is taking place in Toronto, June 25th to 27th. That is the annual sort of flagship event of the Council of the Great Lakes region. And registration is open. We'll be announcing a nice lineup of speakers and programs soon. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about that also. But again, Matthew, thank you so much for all the work that you do and GRI. Really looking forward to staying in touch and cooperating again in the future. So have a great day, everyone.